Assalamu alaikum guys. I hope you're all doing well. So today we're gonna go over the Feb March 2026 paper, and we'll solve each one of the questions together, and we're gonna look at what the exam requirements are and what you were expected to do in each of the questions. So this case study particularly tested the chapters from section 3 and section 2, particularly the marketing mix and the human resource management, the management topic, particularly to be more specific, the management styles, right? So the case study's name is Influencer Experience. So let's read the case study together, and I'm going to tell you how you're supposed to read the case study and interpret each information as well. So it says it's influencer experience. So Kamal is a successful social media influencer, and in 2020 he launched his own social media platform which was called Influencer Experience, right? So he has some social media experience, and then he launched his business, and he is operating in a quaternary sector. Quaternary sector meaning that it's a knowledge based services, a consultancy related services. So Kamal targeted other social media influencers with IX is promotion. IX is influencer experience, the acronym there. And it allows influencers to manage and publish videos on its platform. So it's kind of like you can consider TikTok or Instagram sort of a platform. The unique selling point of IX is that it provides the influencers with better and more detailed information than any other platform. So that's basically their unique selling proposition. And you have to underline this because this is something that we can use in the applications later on. IX is a free to use service for social media influencers, and IX charges other businesses to advertise. Right, so it's an advertisement platform. So this is their revenue model, right? So they charge for revenue advertisements on the platform, but they don't charge users for it, right? And then it's given the price of advertising space is set each month, and the use of dynamic pricing based on how many users click on the advertisement, which is the pay per click, it's given. So pay per click means here that how many users check on the advertisement. So they use dynamic pricing. That dynamic pricing essentially means that prices change based on demand. So real time demand ki basis pe the prices change. And it then gives you some data about the advertisement. It says that influencer A, B, and C, the price per click is given, the number of followers that they have is given. So one thing that you can see here is that the price per click is somewhat directly proportional to their number of followers, meaning that the more followers he have, obviously the more number of people would be looking at his videos, your websites, sorry, the pages, and therefore increasing the demand, and that higher demand would represent that obviously the price should be higher because it's dynamic pricing, right? Uske baad we have been given that IX operations are labor intensive. So it's a labor intensive operations method where Kamal describes his management style as laissez-faire, right? So laissez-faire is basically a let go approach where it's highly decentralized, and workers are given a lot of autonomy to manage their own tasks and do whatever they feel like is good. So there is a lot of flexibility in terms of employees that they can do whatever they want. And so that's what laissez-faire is. And it says that IX has 30 employees who are all managed by Kamal, and then it's given. So there are different types of employees. So the marketing department has 5 employees. They are paid on the basis of profit sharing. Advertising department has, which is the sales department, is has 10 employees. They're based on commission. So obviously incentive linked. They both have incentive linked payments. The better they perform, obviously the more they're paid. Technical department is based on time-based payments, and maintenance department, including the catering and cleaners, are based on time-based payments, right? So you're given the payment structure. Mainly financial motivators have been used here. So this in general is what the case study is about. So if we go over the questions one by one, and I'll explain what is expected from you guys in the exams, is that what you need to do is you need to know the marking scheme as well as how to answer each question, and the format for each question. So whenever you get a term which is an identify question, identify one factor question, and it's 1 mark, you shouldn't give a longer answer, right? The only thing that you should give is the correct factor. So if it says that identify one limitation to a business of labor intensive operations, I shouldn't think more about it. I should think about its labor intensive operations. So that would mean that there would be higher labor costs, right? Or I can talk about labor related problems like trade unions, etc. Labor intensive operations, there is another problem which is quality is not standardized, right? So these are the things. So I would write one of these. Multiple answers, you don't have to write them. Just write one of the strongest factors that you know about, and just in 2 to 3 words or in a single sentence or in a single phrase, just write that down. You don't need to give long, elaborate answers for this, right? Once done with this, let's move on to the next one, which is explain the term quaternary sector of an economy, right? So this question requires, so let's, if you know the marking scheme, the marking scheme is that there is 1 mark for knowledge and there are two for application, right? And the format that I would recommend you guys to follow is define the key term and then explain the key term by applying it to the case, or you can give generic example. The only question in the paper, which is this A2, can get application marks using generic examples, but apart from this, all other questions of the exams, particularly B2 to C part D, all of this require application from the case, right? The only exception that examiners allow is this question part A2, and here you're free to give your own examples as well, right? So define, explain by applying. That means that you have to at least write 3 correct sentences. So define it and at least give 2 correct statements about the term to explain it, elaborate it more, right? So if the question is, you have to define the quaternary sector, I would say this is the part of economy based on knowledge based services like research and consultancy, right? For example, IX, which is, so IX operates in the quaternary sector because it provides a digital social media platform and uses information technology, which is IT, to help influencers manage and publish the videos, right? So this is again explained in context of the case. Now this is the statement that would be application, right? This part, this is the application, and I have developed that application in context of the term, and the knowledge part would be from the definition which is given over here. So this is the knowledge part where we have defined it. So the simple rule is that define and explain by applying. You don't need to write a lot big answers. Ideally, 3 sentences are enough um, to to get you full marks. But those 3 sentences should follow an exact structure, which is here. Right. Moving on, we have a question B1, which is calculate how much it would have cost the business to advertise with influencer A in January if 10% of its followers clicked the advertisement, right? So this is the information that is relevant to us. Notice one thing, that it explicitly tells you, okay, where, which information you need to refer to. So in this case, it says that you need to refer to table 1.1. So for question B1, I am going to put the table here so that we can use it specifically. So if you see, so we need to calculate, so we need to assume that 10% of the followers have clicked the advertisement and the price per click is 0. 0.2, and for the year, so we need to calculate it for January 2026. So that means that the data that is relevant to us is in this table. So we're going to ignore this Feb's data. So one of the problems that many of the students make in the exams is that if the question is asking you that if to calculate it for January or and there are multiple data given, you may have a tendency to select the wrong table. So make sure that you read the question clearly, you understand the requirements, and then you move on, right? So so let's put things into perspective now. It says that total cost to advertise, right? So it says that you need to cost to business for advertisement if influencer A 10% clicked it, right? So businesses को वो कितनी cost पड़ी होगी to advertise on influencers A page? So let's calculate that, right? So number of followers as per January 2026 were um 0.7 million, which is 700,000, right? Um, Total followers which clicked the ad are basically 10% of the total followers. So I'm going to calculate 10% of 700,000, which is 70,000. Then I need to calculate the pay per click in Jan 2026 was how much? It was $0.2 per click. So the pay per click was $0.2. So total cost is going to be pay per click times the number of followers who clicked the ad. So so the total cost is going to be 70,000 multiplied by 0.2, which is going to be $14,000. So this is your answer, that the total cost to businesses who advertise on influences a page would have given $14,000 as their total cost, right? A, a unique but straightforward calculation. Now let's move on to the next question. Let me just adjust the screen a bit. Yeah. Right. So let's move on. Let's go to question number 2B, which is explain one way in which IX adds value to the service, right? So, so let me just give you a little bit perspective. That is, okay, whenever you're answering question number B, part two, especially, the marking scheme is again the same: one for knowledge, two for application. But in this case, remember that the question explicitly uses the name of the business, right? So whichever question explicitly uses the name of the business, there you have to link it with a case study, right? So let's see. So if you see the value that IX adds to the services that they provide, and it was given here as well, that they provide better and more detailed information than any other platform, right? So this is the application that is relevant to my question, right? So what I'm going to do is I'll explain. So so IX adds value by providing influencers with better and more detailed information than other platforms, right? So this is my knowledge point. And then I'm going to explain this. So I want to explain what's the implication of this, right? So this makes the platform more useful because influencers can manage their videos and publish them more effectively. So as a result, this increases the number of users, making it attractive for businesses to advertise on IX, right? So this is now the application developed. So to put things into perspective, 3 marks. And the thing is, again, state the factor, apply the factor, um, essentially explain by applying, right? By applying to the case, right? So this is the format that we particularly use for 3 mark questions. Whether it's they explain the term, and they explain the term, you start with the definition. You don't need to define in 3 mark questions, right? And even in 8 mark question, definitions are not required. Let's move on. Part C, it says that analyze one advantage and one disadvantage to IX of using dynamic pricing. Right? So let's go over this now. So what are the pros and what are the cons of using dynamic pricing? So as we know that dynamic pricing is essentially that you change the price based. So dynamic pricing refers to charging, sorry, changing the price in real time based on the actual demand and market conditions. Right? So again, definition is not required, but it's a good practice like to start with the definition. Though if you're short on time, you can skip out. You won't be penalized for not giving a definition. But it's generally a good practice to start with definition. If you're short on time, you can skip this out. So advantage kya hai? The advantage is again you can and we can use the information that's from here. And remember, numbers are the most easiest way to get application marks. So you can see that dynamic pricing can increase your revenue when the advertisement space's demand is high. For instance, if you see this in January, the person who has high number of followers, his pay per click is higher. So that means that obviously you would be able to make more revenues out of influencer B. And on the other hand, with lower person, obviously if a person has low number of followers, he they're basically paying less, meaning that um you can make both things attractive, right? So and you can also see as the amount of followers increased, right? So from 0.7 to 0.9, that means the demand for influencers A space also increased. So they were able to increase the pay per click. So as a result, making it more attractive, yeah, making charging businesses more, which can lead to greater advertisement revenues. That can increase the profits. So let's write it down, right? So always remember whenever you're structuring a paragraph, para structure in an 8 marks is always you state the factor. Again, you explain, a better word would be analyze it using 4 to 5 links in the chain of reasoning, or as we say it, the chain of analysis. And plus, the chain of analysis should be linked with a relevant case fact that gives you application, right? So the MS is simply, so the MS is 2 for knowledge, 2 for application, 4 for analysis. So analysis, it's an analysis intensive question. And remember, no conclusion or evaluative point has to be given, right? So one benefit, so let's start with it. So let me just put it up over here. Yeah. So, so one benefit of dynamic pricing to IX is that it can increase the revenue of the business when demand is high, right? So, for example, now, okay, so this part where I stated the factor allowed me to access the knowledge marks. When I say, for example, and now I'll give, for example, influencers A, influencers A's price per click increased from $0.2 in January to zero point 0.4 in February, while the number of followers increased from zero point 0.7 million to zero point 0.9 million. And so this means, so this is the case fact which is relevant to my point of discussion. Now this would get me application marks. So this means that IX can charge a business more when an influencer becomes popular. This would result in greater revenues generated, which will lead to improved cash flows for IX. As a result, the total profits and sustainability of the business improves, allowing it to become more competitive. Right? So now you can see the chain of reasoning here is very simple, that this would lead to higher revenues. So they would be able to charge more. This is the first link. As a result, this would lead to greater revenues. This is the second chain of reasoning. That would lead to improved cash flows. As a result, profits and sustainability would improve. And as a result, making business more competitive, right? So these are the links that I've made and I've specified it out. So this is how you develop a chain of reasoning, and this would help you get developed analysis marks. Now, coming on to the second part, which is your drawback. Now, the problem of dynamic pricing is that it can make the costs to the business less predictable. On the other hand, you can also talk about that it's based on algorithms, and that maybe क्या कहते हैं, lead to inaccurate pricing at times. It can glitch out, something like that. You can also talk about that frequent price changes may result in the businesses being क्या कहते हैं, dissatisfied, and that can hurt the brand image, right? So let's write the point. So, however, yeah, you can say on the other hand, a disadvantage. However, a disadvantage of dynamic pricing is that frequent price changes may damage IX's brand image, right? So if the businesses, which are essentially at the paying end, see IX advertisement pricing changing every month, they may feel that the platform is becoming unpredictable, right? So because businesses won't be able to budget their costs because IX would be changing. So you can say कि जैसे all of the influencers pricing has changed, like influencer A and B's pricing has changed, right? So since both influencer A's price per click and influencer B's price per click changed from Jan to Feb, this makes advertisement costs uncertain, making it difficult for the businesses to budget, right? As a result, businesses may switch to rival platforms, leading to reduced customer satisfaction and hurt the brand image. This can lower the sales and the market share of IX, um, reducing its competitive advantage. Right? So, again, let me just point out all the assessment objective descriptors. So, when I stated the disadvantage, this is my knowledge point. Um, the price per click for both decrease. This is my application. And making advertisement costs uncertain is the first link in my analysis. Making it difficult for businesses to budget, the second link. Switching to rival platform, the third. Reducing customer satisfaction, hurting the brand image, and leading to lower sales and reducing the competitive advantage. So this is my chain of analysis, and your chain of analysis should be in depth because this question is about the chain of reasoning, not about your evaluation. So many candidates, what they do is they write a lot of analysis and they don't elaborate on it. So that's something which is not a good practice at all. Moving on, let's look at the last question, which is evaluate whether laissez-faire management style is the most appropriate management style for IX, right? So the 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 emphasis on the most appropriate, right? So whenever you're giving the evaluation and the judgment, this is going to be your discussion point, okay, whether it's the most appropriate, whether it's not the most appropriate, and then you're going to back it up, you're going to justify your judgment. So let's write an answer for this now. So part D. So part D ke andar you have to discuss both sides, why it's appropriate, why it's not. Um, m- m- Many of the candidates approach it as they write the analysis first, they leave the judgment and the evaluation at the end. I personally feel like that evaluation could be done throughout the answer, and that usually is, in my experience, a far better approach compared to if you're giving the judgment at the end. So if you evaluate as you go, it leaves less room for error and less room for losing evaluation marks at the end, right? So let's start with it. So let's see. So we'll start with why it's appropriate. So laissez-faire management style may be appropriate for IX because it encourages creativity and innovation, right? I Because innovation is important because it's in a quaternary sector, it's a service based sector. So you need to make it better, you need creative insights, and you have to give them to influencers, and you have to stand out from the other platforms as well. So that's why this means that you need more creativity, which is encouraged by the laissez-faire management, right? Since IX operates in a quaternary sector and provides social media platform to influencers, it needs to be more detailed and better than other platforms. This means that IX's success depends on skilled employees who can bring creative ideas and solve problems which could help them develop USPs, right? And then you're going to talk about, therefore, laissez-faire management style would help them give employees freedom to explore their ideas, which can help them maintain their competitive advantage by improving the service quality. Right. So now this is again your why they should. And notice I haven't made a detailed analysis in a 12 mark question. And the reason for that is okay, the marking scheme is 2 for knowledge, 2 for application, 2 for analysis, and 6 for evaluation, right? So in this part, my focus is not on developing detailed analysis. My focus would be evaluating my every point, right? So knowledge is by stating for and against 2 factors. Application is by linking those factors with the case, and analysis would be like 2 to 3 links, yeah, would be sufficient for you to get analysis marks here. But your majority focus here should be on evaluation. So one of the problems that students do in their answers is that they give a lot of analysis and they don't focus on evaluation, right? One of the ways to get evaluation is you write the depends on contingency situations, right? So we've already given a judgment. So we've given that therefore laissez-faire management would help them. But however, the extent to which this will benefit IX depends on the skills of the employees, right? So if employees are inexperienced and not self motivated, then laissez faire style will not be appropriate. This is because giving too much freedom will lead to ineffective decisions, which can hurt the productivity, right? So, again, a counter argument is not something which is called evaluation. It's about writing if a benefit exists, on to what extent that benefit would occur, and if a drawback exists, to what extent that drawback is going to exist, right? So moving on now, so this is this the thing that's bold here, this one, this is the evaluation. Now what I'm going to do is I'll write the same why they should not. So I'll say however, now this is my counter analysis, however, IX should not adopt laissez-faire fully because it may lead to loss of control over employees, right? Because you have 30 employees, if you and you need to manage them, and if you give them all of them freedom, then the cooperation could not be built, right? Because everyone would be focusing on what they're doing, their own stuff, but it would hurt team building. It would hurt the teamwork, right? So I'm gonna analyze like that. So let's see. So since IX has 30 employees, now again, this is a case fact. So I've used this case fact to link it with a case. So this gives me application. And are all managed by Kamal. If given too much freedom, all departments, and if you go back to the case, we were given the departments as well, right? Marketing, advertisement, technical, maintenance, right? So all departments, marketing, technical, and maintenance will do their own work without any coordination. This undermines the teamwork and therefore leads to reduced productivity and collaboration at workplace, right? Therefore, laissez-faire management could undermine the क्या कहते हैं group work. So this is now my judgment. So now I'm going to develop the depends on. However, the extent of this limitation will depend on whether Kamal um, manages and guides workers or not. If laissez-faire is adopted, but clear targets are provided and collaboration meetings are held, then this problem will not be significant, right? So this is now the evaluation of this second point. Now my final paragraph is going to be a judgment. And again, remember, whenever you're giving a judgment, a judgment has four main components. So whenever you're writing a judgment, so judgment has four main components, which is a clear stance. So you clearly point out what your judgment is, a justification for that judgment, and that justification should not be a repetition. So it should not be a summary of what you have already said, and number three, a depends on condition. And the judgment in general should have should be in context, right? So the judgment should be in context to the case, it should have a justification, you should take a clear stance, and finally, a depends on condition. So I can say overall, laissez faire management is not the most appropriate style. And now I need to be give the judgment, right? So I'll say although it has benefit like increased creativity in a large business like IX, which is growing, it may create coordination problems, right? And whenever you get this kind of a question where they ask you a certain management style is the most appropriate, you can use this line. I would so a more appropriate one would be a situational management approach. This is because during crisis or urgent situations, an autocratic management style is more appropriate, right? So, and we can now justify why this is so, right? And on the other hand, if a situation requires creative thinking, then democratic or laissez faire would be better, right? So, sticking to one style in all situations will reduce the operational efficiency of IX, right? So, so I'll just remove this to make the judgment more clear. So this is now the justification. So I've taken a clear stance that no, it's not the most appropriate. A better approach is a situational approach, and then I've given a justification. Now what I need to do is I need to elaborate it, right? So since क्या कहते हैं, you can say IX deals with technical staff, marketing staff, and maintenance staff. Each employee may have different nature and would require different management style, right? So this is now again a justification, and this is again a context which I have used from the case study. So different they require a different style. So therefore, sticking to one style for all employees can lead to problems, right? Therefore, whether laissez faire is appropriate or not depends on the type of employees. If employees are highly skilled, laissez faire is appropriate. If not, Kamal should use a more authoritarian style. Authoritarian, or you can say autocratic style. So that's like the final judgment, and you can see 50% of my answer is evaluative comments. The evaluation that's in line and the evaluation that's in the end. So it's an evaluation intensive question and you have to focus more on it. And the examiner reports repeatedly say that you need to focus more on evaluations rather than analysis in these questions. I hope this video was helpful. If you want more, comment down below and we can solve the next case study. Thank you.